Hello, hello. Welcome to another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. My name is Tessa. I am your host. I am so honored and have been looking forward to this conversation today for a very, very long time to have a very special guest, Brad Warner. I'll briefly... Hello, he's waving at you. If you say hello, your screen will switch so people can see you.
Oh, hello.
Hello, hello. Actually, I'll do it like this. Okay, so I'll read Brad's brief author bio, and then we will dive into our conversation, and we will see where it goes. So, Brad Warner is the author of The Other Side of Nothing and numerous other titles, including Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen, Don't Be a Jerk, and Hardcore Zen. A Sōtō Zen teacher, he is also a punk bassist, filmmaker, and popular blogger who leads workshops and retreats around the world. In addition to his books, his writing appears in Lion's Roar, Tricycle, Buddha Dharma, and Alternative Press. He lives in Los Angeles, where he is the founder and lead teacher of the Angel City Zen Center. So, Brad, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you? How's it going?
It's going really well. Before I started recording, I mentioned that I'm in the neighborhood of the Pacific Northwest, and we've had a very, very, very rainy spring, which,
Oh,
we need. We need the rain up here, but I'm blessed to have sunshine today. And when that happens, it's
yeah,
like,
send some of the rain down here. We don't get enough of it. They're
yeah,
giving us drought warnings, so
yeah, right. And are you already in drought officially?
apparently, yeah, they told us we can't water our lawns and that kind of
Mm.
stuff. That's been going around.
Yeah. Are you in a fire zone?
I don't know if this is. I just moved out to. You said I was in Los Angeles because the bio hasn't been updated, but I'm in. I'm west of Los Angeles now, about 40 miles, and I think they talk about floods being a problem here. We're right next to the mountains, so I don't know. We'll see.
We'll
I don't
see,
think
I
there's any
guess.
danger of floods right now because it hasn't rained in months.
Yeah. But did you grow up in Los Angeles?
No, Ohio. Well, my growing up is always a subject people want to talk about because I was born in Ohio.
Uh-huh.
And then when I was 6 or 7 years old, we moved to Africa, to Nairobi in Kenya.
Wow.
And so I lived for almost 4 years of my childhood there and then came back to Ohio. And then
Hmm.
I moved to Japan for 11 years and then I moved to California. And there's a few other stops in between there too.
This is a subject I want to talk to you about because I'm really curious how Buddhism found you or you found Buddhism or, both and. If it was something that you grew up with, if you found it in adulthood.
Yeah, I
Um,
wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't. My family was kind of non-religious, not to say atheists or anything like that. They just didn't, just kind of those typical American family that doesn't really pay attention to religion. But I was interested in it, and I think one of the things that really got me was living in Africa. There's a big Indian population in East Africa, and a lot of Americans don't realize that, but there's a huge Indian population. So I was kind of surrounded by this stuff all the time and thinking, oh, this is I what little I'd heard about God, I didn't imagine him to be a blue guy with 8 arms, and all this stuff that I would see in the Hindu iconography. So I was interested in what was the meaning of life and what everything, what's it all about? Who am I and why am I here? And we came back from Africa. I was 11 years old, and it all that stuff was suddenly sort of taken away because we were in rural Ohio again, in a suburb of Akron. And when I got to college, I decided I wanted to learn about Hinduism. So I'm looking in the college syllabus or whatever, the course book, and I couldn't find any courses about Hinduism, but I found a course called Zen Buddhism. And all I knew about Zen Buddhism was it was a Japanese version of an Indian religion. That's what I could have told you about Zen Buddhism before I started that class. And so I signed up for it because I thought, well, this is close enough. And the teacher was this guy named Tim McCarthy, who was just a he's kind of he's almost a college professor type, but certainly not a Zen master type of person. This skinny guy of Irish descent, talking about Buddhism. But I heard the Heart Sutra, which is a kind of a famous sutra, and it's got a line in it that says, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." And I remember almost weeping when I heard that line. And I was like 18 or 19 years old, sitting in this class going, "Oh my God, that's it." And I didn't know what it meant, but I had this strong feeling that this was the thing, that I'd found this thing that I wanted to find out what that was about. So I just kept practicing. About 10 years later, I ended up moving to Japan, not really to pursue Buddhism, but to get a job teaching English, which led to a job working for a company that made Japanese monster movies. The founder of our company was the inventor of Godzilla, more or less the inventor of Godzilla. But the company I worked for didn't own the rights to Godzilla. We just made sort of Godzilla knockoffs. And I worked there for a long time. And while working there, met a Japanese Zen teacher who was the guy who convinced me to ordain. He kind of thought I should do this. I should teach it. I didn't have any idea that I was trying to become a Zen teacher, but he thought I should do it. So I did it. I wrote books about it, and now here I am.
Yeah. Well, and what part of Japan did you live in? I'm curious. I studied in
Mostly in
Japan.
Tokyo. You studied in
Okay.
Japan?
Yeah, I lived in Okayama
Okayama.
for about 6 months.
Okay. Yeah, I was in Takaoka was the first place I was, which is a really obscure town in Toyama Prefecture, which even you ask Japanese people about Toyama Prefecture, if they haven't been there, they don't know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
But then I went to Tokyo, and that's where I worked for the film company, the film and TV production company.
What was your experience in Tokyo like? I only visited it once while I was there, and it felt to me like it almost felt like I had left Japan,
Yeah.
and
That's like a whole other country. Yeah.
yeah, right. But it didn't feel like anywhere else in the world I had ever been. I mean, I've been all over Germany, Mexico, Canada,
Yeah, I think
London,
Tokyo is its own thing because I
right?
had lived for a year in Japan, and I thought I understood. Okay, I get what this Japan thing is
Mhm.
about. Then I moved to Tokyo. I'm like, wait a minute, this is a whole other. It's a big, it's a huge city. It's not even one city. Technically, it's 28. I forget
Mhm.
what they call it, coup, but and what a coup doesn't translate into anything in English really, but it's 28 smaller towns that got together in the medieval period and decided to be one giant mega city. But
Mhm.
yeah, so it's you've got this all sorts of different things going on in that place.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to visit. Yeah, very stimulating. I mean, I often think of the only thing I could think of as being kind of comparable that I've seen in the world is New York, but
Yeah.
that's not
It
even
is
a fair
similar with the
comparison.
boroughs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, side note, fun place to travel,
Oh yeah.
and or maybe live. Although I guess the last thing I would say about Japan is, and I can only speak to my experience as being a foreigner studying there, it seemed to me like that is the way to do it. Being part of, as a foreigner trying to integrate and become, I guess, Japanese, as it were, just doesn't seem like something that is possible. Is this making sense? I feel like I'm fumbling
Yeah,
over my words here.
it's a country that doesn't really embrace outsiders very
Mhm.
much. But I managed to work for the company I worked for was sort of it's hugely famous in Japan. I would go to my immigration, and they would pepper me with questions about the company I worked for, the immigration guys, because
Yeah.
everybody was fascinated by this company. We made a TV show called Ultraman, Uruturaman, this huge, which is a huge superhero franchise over there, and they're trying to bring it to the U.S. But that was my job for years, but we never could. But now it looks like it might happen. We'll see.
Oh, interesting.
But
Are you
yeah,
still working with them?
no, I don't. I stopped working for them officially. God, I think 2009. But I still maintain contact, and actually,
Mhm.
they were uh, asking me for advice recently because because I'd worked with them for so long, and they're trying to market it in the U.S. So I still do it. They don't pay me though. They
Uh-huh.
should pay me as a consultant or something.
Yeah, yes, they should. Well, this has been a
Sorry.
fun little side tangent. No, I love it. I love learning about people. I think origin stories are fascinating, and that is the impetus of this podcast outside the studio. The idea that, well, I mean, the idea was founded on my love of studying yoga, practicing yoga, the lessons I learned, and similar to when you heard the Heart Sutra for the first time, my resonation with yoga feeling like, oh, this is home, I've come home, this feels like the thing that I need to do to study. And outside the studio came out of this idea that, okay, well, I can practice all these things on my mat, I can integrate them in that moment, but what happens when I leave the studio, what happens when I leave the mat space and I go out into the real world and I have to practice loving kindness, I have to bump up against people that I don't agree with, I have to get mad, I have to have fear, I have to have all of these human emotions. How do I maintain my yoga practice in those very real human moments? And so where was I going with that? I was going to
Well,
say something.
I think it's a really important aspect of this because that's one of the things that Buddhism is. With the rise of mindfulness as a trend, there's this kind of idea of taking certain aspects of Buddhism that are convenient or attractive and separating them out from the rest. And I'm not really a stickler on being um, religious or anything, or you have to be a convert. But the fact is that if you want to have a successful sort of meditation practice, and success is kind of a bad word in Buddhism anyway, but because everything is a success in a sense. But you have to do the whole program. And that's why one of the reasons I wrote this book, the Other Side of Nothing, is to bring the ethical, because I thought people were forgetting about the ethical teachings of Buddhism because they're in a rush to get into the metaphysical, wonderfulness of meditation and have an experience of awakening and all this kind of stuff. But you can't have that experience of awakening unless you kind of integrate the whole program. That's what it's all about.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Tell me more about the concept of everything is a success. I imagine you mean the failure, the all
Yeah,
of the things.
you can succeed at failure. That's that's one of the things one of the aspects of the style of meditation that I learned. It's called shikantaza, which just means just sitting. So the idea is that when you're sitting, when you're doing your seated meditation, you're not doing it for any purpose other than what it is. So measuring success becomes very difficult because it doesn't, you're not looking for anything, you're not trying to change anything about this situation. And that this is where a lot of people, myself included, get lost with the meditation practice, because you're going, well, this isn't any good, I'm not feeling it, or I'm not having the sensations that I think I ought to be having, or I'm not having the awakening experience, or whatever it is people are looking for, so they'll give up. But the thing is, it's just like this is just it. You're just sitting and trying to get into the meat, I suppose, even if you're a vegetarian, of the practice, like trying to get deeply into this one boring thing, which is just sitting still and looking at a wall.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's one thing I actually highlighted from the book, a quote you included from the French philosopher. I'm going to totally butcher this name, so please correct me. Blaise Pascal.
Yeah, I think that's right. Actually, I was unsure about his
Oh, okay.
pronunciation.
Wow. Well, so he famously said all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. It's a shame that simply being quiet is so difficult for us. That last sentence are your words,
Yeah.
which it's so true, isn't it, though? I mean, I imagine I'd love to hear about your study and practice of meditation. Is it something that you do daily? How long do you sit? I hear so many people say, I can't meditate because I can't get my mind to stop thinking.
Yeah.
And to me, that is like, well, that's the purpose of the mind, right? It's supposed to
Yeah, it's supposed to
think
do
and
that.
process.
You can't get your mind to stop. It's just I've tried. There's little things you can do to kind of artificially quiet things down, but there's not much you can really do to stop it. And I sit every day. The first teacher I had said you should do Zazen every day, even if it's for just 5 lousy minutes. I remember he said 5 lousy minutes. And so I usually try to put in an hour every day. Some days are more successful. Let's get back to that word than others, and I manage to get the hour, and some days I don't. But I just had to kind of learn an approach to it that I always compare to brushing my teeth. You get up in the morning and you brush your teeth, and you don't think about, usually I don't think most of us think about why we're brushing our teeth, but you could come up with reasons, to prevent gum disease or to keep fresh in your breath and whatever. But it's also something that you do for other people as much as you do it for yourself, because you don't want to burden everybody else with the stink of your garlic breath. So you brush your teeth. The same with meditation. I practice because if I don't practice, then the day just isn't quite right. The same way it would be if you go out without brushing your teeth. The day isn't quite, right, because everything is a little off. And that's the only approach I've ever learned that works, and it's the only approach that gets me doing it every day. I don't really need motivation any more than I need motivation to brush my teeth. It's just something I do. I get up in the morning, and first thing I do is meditate. So and then I feel better.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. It's like brushing your teeth, and it's understanding the motivation behind why we brush our teeth, that it's actually multifaceted. It's not just for us, it's also for other people. That's so lovely. I think I will borrow that. I'm curious if you had starts and stops in the beginning of your study of Zen Buddhism of this daily sitting.
Yeah, I did. I when I first started, it wasn't like I was gung-ho to meditate. I did have some idea before I started that I wanted to get into a meditation practice. So there was a little bit of that, but I wasn't like, yeah, let's do this. And I didn't think of myself. I still have trouble thinking of myself as a Zen Buddhist, or anything like that. So there wasn't that kind of identification. So there were times when I'd be like, well, I did that for 2 years and nothing happened, so I'm going to give up. And I just kind of slack off and not do it. But the problem was every time I slacked off and didn't do it, then there would be this process that I went through several times, an embarrassing number of times, I think, before I got it, where the noise level and the distraction and all the stuff in my head would just get bigger and bigger. And I'd be going, well, what's wrong? What's going on? Am I drinking too much coffee? Am I not drinking enough coffee? I'm not getting enough sleep. And I go through this and go, oh yeah, I'm not meditating anymore. I better start doing that again. And then I would start doing it again. And it's not like the meditation practice made me feel spectacular, but it was certainly, there was a big difference. The days when I did it felt better than the days when I didn't. And I finally, after I don't know how many years of going back and forth, just came to the conclusion that, well, I just have to do this every day. It's just one of the things I got to add to my list of stuff I do every day. And I remember actually going through a process where I figured out what I did during the day and how I could clear an hour for meditation every day. And then, at the time I was working a regular job, where I had to get up and commute to work every morning. So I set the alarm for 20 minutes earlier and, figured it out and just do it. And that just got down to making it happen.
I have one more. Well, no, that's not true. I have a million more questions about this. But my next question I think I'm saying one more question because there's so many different topics I want to touch on. I want to make sure I'm not just drilling you about meditation, but I'm curious if for you found sitting in a particular style. Zazen, I believe, is what I would call virasana, with your shins and your the tops of your feet flat, sitting back on your heels. a cushion
Well,
or something.
yeah, there is that version. I tend to do they call it this the pose I do Burmese. I used to do full lotus, but then my legs started
Mm.
rebelling against that.
Yeah.
So I stopped doing full lotus, but I'm fairly close. But that's the way I sit. Yeah.
Okay.
And it comes out of the yoga tradition. The story is that the Buddha was looking at, the different sort of yoga postures that were around during his time, because I think the posture system has changed a lot since then.
Yes.
But the Padmasana, they call it, the lotus posture, was always there, and he thought, well, this is the best posture to take to work on what he wanted to work on.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've heard that similar story that when I think about the tree of yoga, at the root of it, the yoga tradition, and then Buddhism as like a trunk or a branch off
Yeah.
in a different direction. And I wanted to, so Zen Buddhism, I think you mentioned a particular style
Mhm.
of Buddhism. And in your book, you talk about it actually just meaning meditation.
Yeah.
Dhyana, I believe, is the word. And I'm not sure if you pronounce it differently. So please, again, correct me if it sounds different to you. Is the Japanese word for meditation. So when you say Zen Buddhism, it means
Yeah, I
basically
mean meditation. Yeah,
meditation.
that it's the word Zen comes from that word dhyana, and then the Chinese pronounced it Chan, and then the Japanese, it's just the same word, and the Japanese pronounce it Zen. It's just how, words morph as they go through different areas, but it's the
Yeah.
same word. And Zazen, Za is just a shortened form of the Japanese word for sitting.
Mm-hmm.
So it means seated meditation. And so Zen Buddhism is a specific tradition which you can follow the lineage, and the Zen people are really into lineage, because that was something that was introduced in China. The Indians apparently didn't have so much of an interest in lineage, although I think they do now. But the Chinese kind of got into this idea of the lineage. But on the other hand, to me, what Buddha taught was meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And there are different schools of Buddhism, and there are people who would argue with this, but I think any sort of Buddhism that doesn't include meditation isn't really being true to the founding principles of the thing, because it really is all about meditation. So that's the Zen Buddhist sort of stance on things. That's the story that we tell, that we are the Buddhists who kept the meditation at the center of things.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't want to argue with other forms of Buddhism, but that's kind of what that means when people call it Zen Buddhism.
Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear more about the title of your book, The Other Side of Nothing. And subtitles, I believe, are just as important. Yours being The Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being. Will you tell me more about how you come up with this, what it means to you, why it's important?
Well, the other side of nothing is a line from Kobun Chino Roshi, who was my first Zen teacher's teacher. I never actually met Kobun, but he was a Japanese monk who came over to the US in the 60s, and was briefly at the San Francisco Zen Center, and then went to Taos, New Mexico, and other places. But he has this lovely line that I found in a speech by him, where he says, it's important to go to the other side of nothing, where you are held by the hand of the absolute. And it's just I really love that phrase, but it's also kind of weird. What is that? What is the other side of nothing? And I think he means that you kind of negate yourself, in a sense, in this practice. You come to understand the falsehood of your personal self.
Mm-hmm.
And once you kind of cross that barrier of finally understanding that self is an illusion, you find that, and this is typical Zen wordplay, that the self isn't an illusion, that there is that the self is actually a fundamental thing in the universe, but it's not what we normally think of it as. It's not something that belongs to me. It's something that belongs to everything. The self that I think is my personal property, that I am the only the only Brad Warner there is. And I suppose, I mean, there's other people named Brad Warner, but, I'm the only me there is. But on the other hand, this me that I think belongs to me alone is something that's a fundamental aspect of the universe. And the same me is acting through every being there is. That's kind of what the other side of nothing means. And the subtitle, the reason I sort of laughed when you said that, I don't know if people caught that, but we went back and forth, me and the publishers, over the subtitle. And I'd written that one, the Zen Ethics of Time, Space, and Being. And my editor said, well, that one's kind of, I don't really know what that means, but that one feels right. That one make, and I thought, well, yeah, that's kind of how I intended it. Cause it's sort of, there is the Zen ethics are all about, they're deeply connected with the idea of this universal oneness, that myself and yourself and all the listeners' selves are not different selves, but are the same self, interacting differently in different circumstances, but intimately just connected, so connected that there isn't a difference at all between us. And all of the Zen ethical system comes from that understanding. And in order to understand what Zen ethics is about, you have to understand what this universal oneness. So that's why the book is this kind of mashup of, I wanted to write a book about ethics, but I realized I couldn't write a book about ethics without writing about this. They use the word non-duality, and I always bristle at these terms, because once they become trendy, then they lose all their meaning. And non-duality, I think, is on its way to losing its meaning, because people are using it too much. But it's the only word we have for this. The idea that non-duality means there aren't two or a bazillion things in the universe. There's only this one thing. And understanding that is difficult, I think, for most of us, myself included.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It feels like what we're loosely talking about, or maybe directly talking about, is the dichotomy of the yin and the yang, almost the idea that you are not, let's see, how do I say, you use so many good metaphors in the book, like the musician and the instrument, and it not being music until the musician picks up the instrument and starts to play it. And so it's kind of the idea of you are and you aren't, which,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that's what you're saying, both directly and indirectly. And how do we even talk about something like that? How do we articulate it?
It's difficult, yeah.
Yeah.
Because there are contradictions. I mean, that's what Dogen is, the guy I've studied the most. He lived about 800 years ago in Japan, and he was the sort of the founder of the version of Zen that I practice in. And his writings are difficult because they're so full of contradictions. And I think some of the early translators of Dogen tried to smooth out the contradictions, because they thought this was, this doesn't make sense. This is all contradictory. He says one thing and then he says the opposite. But that's exactly what he wants to do. And because life is contradictory. And one of the things our big overdeveloped brains do is we try to organize things. And that's useful, because that's how you get through life. You have to kind of understand the difference between your butt and a hole in the ground, or whatever whatever the thing is you want to understand the difference between. But you also there's also that difference that we're seeing is a bit of a trick that the brain plays in order to kind of navigate the world. But we think that trick is reality, and that's where we get lost. We think, oh, I'm me, and if I can do something to somebody else and gain something from it, that's good for me. But that is never good for you. It's actually bad for you to gain at the expense of someone else. And that's, the Buddhist ethics are all about how you can't, you think you can have a better life by acting unethically. A lot of us think that way, and it's obvious if you look at the world that a lot of people imagine they can do that, but it's impossible. It never works. and the sooner you learn that it's never going to work, the better.
Mm, yeah. The- Okay, so many different directions my brain is going right now. I think what I want to explore is the questions around just being able to discern when we are faced with choices, decisions we have to make. You could think of it like a fork in the road. You could think of it as relationship choices, career choices, in general, the path or the purpose that your life takes. So the idea of free will, fate,
Mm.
and then also discerning, how do I choose? How do I choose what is right for me? How do I choose, does it feel like it's always this choice of me versus them? How do I choose both? How do I put myself first and also not trample over someone else in the process?
It's a really difficult one. About choice, my teacher used to always say, if you're faced with a choice, the right decision is obvious immediately.
Mm.
But we, because of these big overdeveloped brains, we tend to overthink things, and then we get confused over, because the brain can always think of another choice, even when the actual necessary choice is the most obvious thing in the world. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, there's no way that's true, because I always have trouble figuring out what to do. But this is, I've actually been working with this whole idea of free will and determinism recently, thinking about that and thinking about how Buddhism frames it differently. Like Western philosophy is all, they really discuss this a lot, where it's not really discussed in exactly those terms in Buddhism. But a lot of people in Eastern philosophies will say there's no free will at all. And I think, well, yeah, I understand why you say that. I feel like we have a little bit of free will. We overestimate how much free will we have,
Mm.
you know. But my teacher would say, well, of course there's free will. If somebody sits a plate of food in front of me, I can eat it or not eat it. you know and I really, I like that, because he's not saying there's free will in this kind of big picture sort of thing. It's just when a situation presents itself, then you have a certain amount of freedom within that situation to do something. And that's where the ethical precepts come in. If you don't know what to do, if your mind is overactive and you're coming up with all sorts of alternatives, then the precepts are there. The precepts are just kind of nice rules, and a lot of them are very similar to the Ten Commandments. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. There's several that are exactly the same as the Ten Commandments, but they're just the Buddhists use them as a kind of guideline. You shouldn't get so enamored. That's probably not the word I'm looking for. You don't want to get so stuck in reading the in a kind of linguistic trick where you say do not kill means this, that to where you don't have any freedom to act, but you know that those are usually the best thing to do. um,
Mm.
so there are very few situations in which killing would be the right thing to do, but the Buddhists acknowledge that such situations do exist. So, even though it's very rare, it happens, and we have to have the freedom to act properly, even when it goes against the precepts. So, you have the precepts which are there and which are important, and you have this attitude that you have to be also free enough to know when you break the precepts.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, so then there's this thread of suffering, and I think about, well, I think, okay, so it starts to take me down this path of suffering, karma. What does that mean? Number one, what is karma?
Yeah.
And why is there so much suffering? Well, like, for example, I remember some of my earliest kind of philosophical questions to my parents were, why is it that we in the United States, or me in my little suburban neighborhood, get to live in relative safety while others are living in war torn, poverty stricken
No.
places? Why is that a thing that exists? I can't remember exactly what my parents told me, but that's just always been kind of this constant question that I have. And then as I started to study yoga and thinking about karma, before that, I had this kind of, what is the word? Very flat, I guess I would say, idea that karma is this thing of, I guess, basically cause and effect. There is
Yeah.
an action and there is a reaction,
Yeah.
but not necessarily that you did something wrong, so you're going to pay for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, will you talk to me a little bit about these concepts?
Yeah, well, it's a really difficult one because one of the things I think about karma um, is it's something you should only point at yourself. So that if you start to think of karma in terms of those people, then you get lost, and a lot of people do, and it justifying injustice and all this stuff, and it does happen. There's some guy I met in Germany was talking to me about how in India there's this the idea of karma has some really bad implications sometimes where people don't want to help, in a disaster, or somebody in deep poverty, because you think, well, I don't want to disturb their karma. That's the karma they have to go through. And then it has that negative aspect. But I think that's a misunderstanding, because karma is also what I do in this situation. So that's why I say point it at myself. I don't think, oh, that person must have done something bad in a past life or whatever it is, and they're suffering for it, and so I shouldn't get involved, because my karma is to help. That's part of what I can do in this situation. So I try not to look at the big picture too much. I know the philosophical underpinnings of Buddhism and Hinduism, and a lot of yoga philosophy and all that have to do with it. But when I think about karma, I think about how is it working in my life? What did I do, that caused me trouble, and what can I do to be of benefit to somebody else? And a lot of it has to do with what comes into my sphere. There's only I can't do much about the big problems of the world. I can't solve, whatever, fill in whatever crisis you want to. I can't go out and solve that. But if there's something right here in my midst that I can do something about, then I do that. And I feel that those things add up. The way, the example I always give is the way you treat the clerk at the grocery store. You don't know what how that's going to move out. If you're having a bad day and you shout at some random customer service person because you've been having a bad day, well, then that affects their day, and it has this wider repercussion that you don't know about. So in order to not let too much of that happen, I try to just keep my thing together, which is back to one of the reasons I meditate. I meditate so that I am not bringing as much of that anger and nastiness into the world as I might if I didn't meditate.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm curious to know about a little bit more about Buddhist philosophy on sexuality, and in particular, the Buddhist precept that, well, I think it's usually phrased as "don't misuse sexuality."
Yeah.
And you talk about it in your book as a statement more like, "I vow not to hold excessive desires."
Yeah.
Will you tell me about this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And I wrote a whole book a few years ago called Sex, Sin, and Zen about just that precept, because it's one that I think everybody who gets into this stuff struggles with, because originally the Buddhists took a vow of celibacy. So they dealt with the problem of sexuality by just saying, we're just not going to have sex, and but for a lot of people, that itself becomes a problem. There are people who are celibate, who are probably better off just not being celibate because because it's causing them so much difficulty in their lives. So you have to kind of navigate that one. But the version of the precept that says don't hold excessive desires is the one that my teacher preferred. And there are different versions out there. And one of the things I do in the book is I put out a bunch of the different versions that I found in the literature. But most of it has to do with the idea that sex is something that is, people talk about casual sex, and I understand what they mean, but I don't think it can ever, when you're interacting with somebody at that level, it can't be casual, at least in the sense that we usually think of casual, because it's such a merging of, literally often a merging of people. So you have to be very, very careful when it comes to that stuff. But the Buddhist attitude is interesting because God, when I was on the tour promoting that Sex, Sin, and Zen book, I could rattle them off. The forbidden forms of sex in Buddhism are kind of surprising in that some of them are obvious. You try to maintain fidelity and stuff like that. But for example, there's no anti-homosexual thing in Buddhism. The only thing that comes out along those lines, and a few years ago, this popped up on the internet as a thing, like Buddhists are just as anti-homosexual as anybody else. Look at this. And what they were pointing to were some monastic regulations because they had a vow of celibacy. So some of the monks and nuns took that to mean no sex between men and women. But sex between women and sex between men and men is fine. And then they had to kind of clarify that by saying, no, all, if you're going to be celibate, you have to be completely celibate. And so even that sort of sex is forbidden. But that's the only place that you find it. There's no attitude that there's certain expressions of sex that are any better or worse inherently than any other. It's just that you have to be careful with sex itself because it is such a hot issue. If you sorry, as I said, hot issue, I just wanted to make a terrible joke, but if you do it right, but but it is something that causes a lot of emotions and a lot of personal interaction, and that can get you into trouble. So it's one of the ones you have to be really, really careful about. And it's hard to say much more than that as a blanket statement. Just be really careful about that one, and how that manifests itself is going to be different for everybody who's trying to navigate those waters.
Yeah. I feel like I think I just need a moment to pause and kind of let all of that sink in because I don't know how to follow up with other than, these are questions that I often ask myself, and I feel like are central to our humanity.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's how the human race continues, so everybody, you can't be anti-sex and a Buddhist because the Buddha himself appeared in this world because his parents had sex. So it's, it happens.
It does.
That's how life continues, but you just have to be really careful about it. You can't be, you can't.
I guess I think when you say you have to be really careful about it, I wonder, do you think that's because human emotions are involved and we don't want to hurt people unnecessarily, or because the thing that happens when you connect on that level is so powerful? Yeah. Or what do you mean by being really careful?
Well, yeah, that's, the reason I say it that way is because it's hard to pin down, exactly what that means. You just have to be aware that you're entering into an area that could potentially go very wrong. So you have to I keep saying be careful. That seems to be the only thing I kind of default to. It does, because as you say, there's emotions involved, and then there's all sorts of stuff when humans get, there's jealousy and that possessiveness. We happen to be the type of animal, I suppose, that other animals don't seem to have much of a problem with jealousy, but we
Mm.
do. So you have to be careful with that. You have to just, one of the things that people do is they get into a fantasy of like, well, there shouldn't be jealousy, and I'm just not going to have jealousy. Well, yeah, good luck with that one. I think it's better to acknowledge that these things are real, and then try to do something with it than to just, say, well, I'm not going to be jealous.
Yeah.
It's not gonna, it
Well,
doesn't work.
I think that's a really interesting point because when jealousy comes up, at least for me, I think then it's quickly followed by a judgment about my character.
Yeah.
Because I'm having jealousy, I am not altruistic, I am not evolved enough, I haven't figured out how to have a open, loving, free enough relationship, or maybe it means something about my self-confidence in that I'm not confident enough to be
Yeah.
secure in myself. So it's so like like you're saying, it's I guess you have to be careful with that one, right?
Yeah, that's the thing, because you can't, that if you try to deny what's actually going on. I mean, it's fine. You might have that judgment and say, well, I'm not evolved enough or whatever, but okay, so maybe that's true, but then here's the real situation. The situation is that I am feeling this way, and uh, whether that's right or wrong is not so important as, well, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
You can think that it's wrong, but that's not gonna erase the feelings that you have. At least it has never worked for me.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to somebody who's experiencing something like that and wants to honestly look at their feelings? And I mean, it doesn't have to be jealousy, but let's continue on that thread just
Oh,
because
sure.
I think it's interesting. From the lens of Buddhism, what would Buddha say in terms of here's this challenging emotional human response or trigger? What is its purpose? What do you do with it? And yeah, what is your reaction to it?
It's hard to say because every situation is different, but the general understanding within Buddhism is that you have feelings or emotions, and you don't deny them, but you also don't grab onto them. The problem that we have with a lot of our emotions, whatever they are, is they become mine,
Mm.
and you have a difficulty letting go. And this is one of the things that's great about the practice of Zazen, the kind of meditation style that I do, is that you're kind of forced to let go of things, because you're not going to be able to sit that long if you can't let go, especially if you're on a retreat or something where you're doing it for days and days on end. It becomes very uncomfortable to keep holding on to emotional things that always come up. And so learning to let go in a situation where it's relatively easy, like you're sitting in a meditation hall with a bunch of people that are just sitting still all day. Uh, in that situation, it's relatively easy. It's much easier than if you're in the heat of an argument with somebody
Mm.
that you care deeply about. It's very hard to let go in that situation. But if you can practice letting go in easy situations, then when the difficult situations do come up, it's a little easier. It doesn't mean it's going to be just a breeze. You're just gonna do it. Because you did your meditation, you're going to be able to handle every situation. That's one of the unfortunate problems with the meditations that's presented, is as if it's kind of a magic pill that's gonna fix anything. It's more like exercise in that sense, that you do it every day, and because you've done the exercise every day, you have certain benefits from it. But yeah, the even even when your anger is completely justified, anger always gets in the way of trying to solve or resolve a problem. So you have to learn to let go of anger, and a lot of that is easy. It's certainly easier said than done, but it can be done. I've worked on it enough to go, oh yes, this can be done, but it's just it's kind of a skill that you learn over time, really. Um,
Mm.
in Buddhism, it's terrible to say skills you learn over time, because every time is this time.
Right.
There's
But
a whole
now,
lot of that in the book, but
yeah.
but I think in nuts and bolts, day-to-day reality, there are skills that you learn over time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And I kind of think about that as being cumulative. Like you were saying, you practice it in a low stakes environment in relative safety when you're not you're not pouring gasoline on that
Yeah,
flame, and you can kind of see more clearly in that sense, and then acknowledge how it feels. Okay, I'm feeling this emotion come up, I'm looking at this, and now I'm practicing letting it go, because it's not, you don't have to feel like I have to be right in this moment, I have to be right
yeah.
because this other person has to be wrong. So I can see how it's a little bit easier to learn how to let something like that go in that safe environment.
Yeah, yeah.
So I want to wrap us up here. I want to be mindful of your time, and I'm curious. So this book came out, when did this book? May 10th.
Hmm.
Um so what are you working on now? What's next? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I don't. I do a YouTube channel, and as soon as we finish this talk, I'm going to go make another video that I really enjoy doing, and people seem to be responding. I'm not one of the biggest YouTubers out there, but I've got a following, and I really like doing that. I'm going to be going to Europe in September. I've been going every year since 2009, with the obvious year exception that I didn't go. But that's really interesting, because it's a whole different, it's a bit newer over there. Buddhism hit Europe about 10 years after it hit the United States, so it's a bit like time travel in a way. You get to see what Buddhism was like when it was first introduced in the US. You can find they haven't quite worked it out, which I think is a good thing. I think one of the things we've done wrong in the US is uh, we're trying too hard to put our own stamp on Buddhism and make it, this thing. We're not naive enough anymore. So I'm
Mm.
doing that, and I'm sure I'll write another book. I haven't started working on a follow-up to this one, but it's a bit too soon to do that. But yeah, I'm doing all that stuff.
What's the name of your YouTube channel?
It's Hardcore Zen. So if you go to youtube.com/hardcore Zen, that's the best way to find the YouTube channel. And then I have a blog that's hardcorezen.info that has, connections to all the other stuff that I do.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll make sure to include those links in our show notes so that people can easily find you and follow you.
Thank you.
Is there any last words of wisdom that you would like to share? Anything else on your mind?
I never know what words of wisdom to share when people ask me to share words of wisdom. No, I think there's this phrase I've been using on my YouTube channel, which I got from the movie This Is Spinal Tap, which is have a good time all the time. There's, the heavy metal band in that movie. There's this, I think it's the keyboard player or somebody. It's not one of the main guys, but he says, have a good time all the time. And I think so. So I think, oh, that's good. There is a way to have a good time even when you're having a bad time. Learn, if you can learn to see even the dullest, most boring moments as moments when you're really alive, that can be really useful. So maybe that's my words of wisdom.
I love it. My sound editor is going to love you. He is a huge fan of Spinal Tap.
Oh,
So
good.
I think you just became his new favorite guest.
Well,
um, with that said, Brad, it's been such a privilege to chat with you. And I just appreciate you showing up and sharing what you've learned and your experience
thank you for
with
having me.
us. Yeah, of course. So best of luck to you, and everyone go check out it's Hardcore Zen, right?
Hardcore Zen.
On Brad's blog and YouTube channel. And yeah, have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't, be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.